The movie begins with a group of people gathered in a rustic church to attend a highly anticipated seminar by Antenna Research, a leading company in the development of cutting-edge virtual reality games. The event is centered around the debut of the company's latest and most advanced game, Existenz, designed by the world-renowned and brilliant game designer Allegra Geller. As the attendees, who are all avid GamePod enthusiasts and technology aficionados, settle into their seats, Allegra, looking both nervous and determined, steps into the spotlight, ready to demonstrate her revolutionary new game that promises to redefine the boundaries between reality and the virtual world. She walks onto the stage shyly and introduces the Existenz game. After her brief introduction, the event staff asks for volunteers to test the game and then selects people from the audience. By the door, Ted Picola, PR manager, stops a man who rushes in late. Ted checks his belongings to ensure he isn't carrying a gun. Ted saw something and the man explained that it was his game pod. After an inspection, Ted let him in. On the stage with the volunteers, Allegra reveals an organic-looking device called a pod, which serves as the game system. As Allegra and the volunteers connect to test Existenz, everyone starts looking at the people on stage instead. Suddenly, the latecomer pulls out a strange gun from his game pod and shouts, "Death to the Demoness, Allegra Geller," before shooting a man in Allegra in the shoulder. Chaos erupts and the event bodyguards quickly take down the shooter. Allegra falls on the ground, the guards repeatedly shoot the man. The dying man, who introduced the event, tells Ted to protect Allegra. Ted grabs the gun that the man used and goes to Allegra's unconscious body. He then carried her and took her to the car. He then drives away into the night. He asks where he is supposed to go and asks Allegra if there is anyone she knows and she can go to. Allegra, now better than she was before, started to examine her shoulder wound. When Ted takes out a peculiar-looking phone, Allegra snatches it and throws it out the window. He complained about losing his phone, and Allegra explained that it's a tracking device. She asked why he wasn't armed, since he is her security, but Ted revealed that he is a marketing trainee and not her security. She then asks Ted to stop the car so he can remove the bullet from her wound. Ted used a small knife to dig up her wound to get the bullet out. After removing the bullet, he saw that it was actually a tooth. Weirded out by this, he showed Allegra that he found a tooth. Allegra examines the gun and finds it not just unusual, but disturbingly crafted from bones. Ted realizes this is why it went unnoticed during his inspection. They continue their journey, eventually stopping at a motel. Allegra sleeps on the bed, while Ted sits on the chair. Allegra checks her game, Existenz, to ensure it's still functioning, which it is. However, she needs a partner to properly test the game. While Ted considers calling the game company, Allegra examines him and notices he lacks a bioport, a hole at the base of the spine necessary for accessing virtual reality games like Existenz. She asked if he had ever played the game. Ted admits that despite being a huge fan of Allegra and her games, he has a fear of bodily penetration. Allegra urges Ted to get a bioport installed so they can test Existenz. She explains that the game took 5 precious years to develop, and she doesn't want her work to go to waste. Ted reluctantly agrees, and they head to a gas station. After refueling, Allegra asks the mechanic Gas for help with Ted's bioport issue. Initially, Gas pretends not to understand, but he quickly recognizes Allegra as the famous game designer. He drops to his knees, kisses her feet, and eagerly agrees to assist. Inside the building, Gas changes into cleaner attire. Ted asks how Allegra had impacted Gas's life, and Gas responds by saying that Allegra's work liberated him from reality. Gas then takes out a tubular machine, causing Ted to have second thoughts, but Gas reassures him there is no risk of infection. Outside, while exploring the gas station, Allegra spots a 2-headed amphibian hybrid, which fascinates her. When she returns inside, she finds Ted wielding a large metal wrench, threatening Gas. Allegra speaks to Ted, urging him to embrace this change or remain trapped in his fears. In the next scene, Ted reluctantly agrees to undergo the bioport procedure, collapsing into the chair as if paralyzed from the waist down. Gas reassures him that he will recover quickly. Allegra insists on connecting the tube from her pod to test Existenz immediately. However, the pod short-circuits, angering Allegra. She accuses Ted of being too nervous, but he denies it. Moments later, Gas returns with a shotgun and points it at Allegra. He admits to sabotaging the bioport, revealing there is a bounty on both Allegra and her game. Fortunately, Ted kills fills gas with a mechanical tool. After this close call, they drive to a seemingly abandoned ski lodge that Allegra knows. Ted notices the two-headed creature Allegra saw earlier, and she comments that it's a sign of the times. They enter the lodge where a man named Kiri Vinokur greets Allegra warmly, suggesting they are old friends. Allegra asks Vinokur to fix her pod and allow them to stay for a while, and Vinokur agrees. Vinokur and his assistant begin repairing the pod, which is organic and filled with flesh instead of wires, much to Ted's disgust. When Vinokur asks how the pod was damaged, Allegra explains that Ted has a faulty bioport. Ted, commenting that it looks like they are dissecting an animal, is informed by Vinokur that it is indeed an animal, crafted from fertilized amphibian eggs, infused with synthetic DNA, using the human body as its power source. After completing the repairs, Vinokur installs a new bioport for Ted. That night, Allegra connects the tube from the pod and starts the game. As Ted stands, he finds himself seamlessly transported to another reality, arriving at what appears to be a store. Ted is amazed by the realism of the game and asks Allegra about the objective. Allegra responds that he needs to play to discover more. Ted finds a mini version of Allegra's pod hanging in the store. When he touches it, a man named R.C. Nader appears, warning them of its delicacy and introducing himself as the store owner. He then leads them to a room. Inside, Nader inquires who sent them, and Ted, momentarily aggressive, tells him it's none of his business. Realizing he was out of control, Ted apologizes. Allegra reassures him, explaining that it was his in-game character who spoke earlier. She advises him to provide Nader with appropriate dialogue to advance the game's plots. After feeding Nader the correct dialogue, he instructs them to use the mini-pods for their new identities. Once Nader leaves, Allegra goes first, inserting the mini-pod into her bioport, which surprises her as it gets pulled inside. Ted then follows and unexpectedly licks the bioport, startling Allegra. Ted apologizes, claiming his character acted on its own. Allegra suddenly kisses Ted, noting that the game encourages intimacy to foster emotional attachment. Ted is then seamlessly transported to an assembly line, assuming a new identity. His task is to dissect amphibians for game pods inside what used to be a trout farm. Beside him, a man introduces himself as Yevgeny Nourish. Despite never having dissected amphibians before, Ted performs the task with surprising skill. Yevgeny asks Ted where he plans to eat lunch and suggests the nearby Chinese restaurant in the forest, advising him to order the special and not take no for an answer. Shortly after, Ted is called to deliver a pushcart full of amphibians to the back. While delivering the pushcart, Ted encounters Allegra, now in a new identity. He tells her to eat at the Chinese restaurant and order the special. They join the other factory workers heading to the restaurant. Upon arrival, a waiter greets them and asks for their order. Ted requests the special, causing a moment of silence. The waiter explains that the dish is reserved for special occasions, and Ted insists it is Allegra's birthday. After successfully ordering the special, the others at their table leave without a word. Ted expresses his desire to pause the game, but Allegra insists they continue. Ted stands and shouts, "Existenz is paused." Ted then finds himself back in the real world, lying on a bed, feeling uneasy and unable to distinguish reality from the game. After Allegra convinces him, they re-enter the game to continue the story. Back at the Chinese restaurant, the special is served, a platter of grotesque meats that appear alien in origin. Despite his disgust, Ted eats the dish as his character would. While eating, he reconstructs the bone gun from earlier, pointing it at Allegra and shouting the same words the assassin had used before, "Death to the demoness Allegra Geller." Ted quickly drops the act. He then told Allegra he wants to kill someone, then he suggested killing the waiter, which Allegra also agreed to. They call the waiter, and when he starts coming towards them, Ted starts to hesitate. He told Allegra he wouldn't do it because the game seems too real. The waiter comes and Ted shows him the bone gun. He then shoots the waiter twice, killing him. Standing from his seat, Ted addresses the virtual customers, explaining it was just a dispute, and the crowd unrealistically resumes their activities. They proceed to the back to meet Yevgeny, who reveals that the waiter was actually a spy, and that he, Yevgeny, works for the realists. He instructs them to return to Nader's store to maintain their agents there. Upon returning to the store, they ask the cashier about Nader's whereabouts. The cashier leads them to the back, where they find Nader asleep. The cashier informs them that killing the waiter was a mistake as he was their contact, and reveals that Nader and Yevgeny were collaborating against the realists. They then head back to the trout farm to confront Yevgeny. They search for an object and find a diseased game pod in a nearby room. Despite Ted's reluctance, Allegra feels compelled to port it, which proves harmful. Ted cuts the cord, causing it to spurt blood, and Allegra begins bleeding profusely. Yevgeny reappears with a flamethrower and burns the diseased pod, releasing deadly spores upon its explosion. Allegra then shoots Yevgeny in the back, killing him as the entire place burns down. Ted and Allegra wake up back in reality. Allegra finds her game pod infected and cries out in frustration. While attempting to save the pod, she discovers that Vinokur intentionally infected Ted's bioport and seals it for good measure. Suddenly, an explosion occurs outside, a man with a gun enters. It is the cashier from the game. A confused Ted comments that they must still be in the game. The cashier shoots the game pod, causing Allegra to scream at the top of her lungs. After stepping outside, the man points a gun at them, declaring that Allegra Geller must die. However, he is quickly killed by Vinokur. Allegra angrily lashes out at Vinokur for destroying her game, but Vinokur clarifies that he only killed her game pod, not Existenz. He offers her a chance to defect to his side, so she can see her game again. In a swift move, Allegra grabs the gun from the dead man and shoots Vinokur to death. Ted scolds her, questioning what if this is no longer a game. In a shocking twist, Ted reveals himself to be an assassin too. However, Allegra is one step ahead, as the seal she placed in Ted's bioport is actually a bomb. She triggers it, causing the bomb to explode and kill Ted. Allegra triumphantly shouts that she has beaten the game. Allegra then realizes she is wearing some kind of advanced technology on her head and wrists. The film transitions to a higher level of reality, revealing that Allegra, Ted, and the other characters are actually within another game called Transcendence. The characters discuss their roles and performances. As the game session concludes, Yevgeny, one of the developers, expresses his unease because the game begins with the premise of assassinating a game developer. Ted and Allegra, now outside, confront the developers, accusing them of creating a device that distorts reality. They then proceed to kill the developers. The movie ends with the waiter from earlier asking them if they are still in the game. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Watch our next videos on the screen, and don't forget for more amazing recaps. See you on the next one.